It was during the Civil War, and many times I remember, like, we used to go to school, but sometimes there was shut down because there was fighting, and we had an underground war shelter, and I remember spending a lot of time there, and each family had their own little sections. I just felt like that whole building, we were a family living underground, like a tight-knit family. Once I started to just obviously focus on what I can control and my abilities, I started to do so much better, because I did start to suffer in my sales and my business once I did start to have that victim mindset, even in my dating life.
So today we have on the show Rana Kordahi, who is the founder and director of the Selling Academy, but we're not going to be talking too much about sales. We're going to be talking around victimhood mindset, something Rana is open that she suffered with when she was younger. We're going to be talking around how she got out of that mindset, how her parents were influential in that. We're talking a little bit about her life, which is very interesting, how she was born in Beirut in an underground war shelter. She then moved to Cyprus. She then moved to Australia, but she's also traveled all around the world, lived in Mexico. She's also going to be talking around how she actually had an experience with ayahuasca, and she saw her traveling as not that constructive, and she wanted to get a bit more stability in her life. And it actually helped her with that. Really interesting conversation, and I think you're all going to enjoy it. Right, Rana, I'm excited for this show because I think we share quite a lot in common. Actually, we both lived in Latin America. We both in a similar profession now of sales training. So I think it's going to be a good podcast. But I wanted to start with actually your early childhood, because I know one of the things you said is that you were living in an underground war shelter in Beirut. So I was wondering if you'd be able to talk a little bit more about that.
Well, thanks for having me, Michael. Oh, wow. Straight into it. Into the... Okay, so I was born in Beirut, and it was during the Civil War. And many times I remember, like, we used to go to school, but sometimes there was shut down, where it's like locked down because there was fighting. And I remember spending a lot of time. So we lived in this building with, flats, different people, but we had an underground war shelter. And I remember spending a lot of time there. And each family had their own little sections. We used to section it off with, those bags that you fill with sand, like you said. And then we had, little cooking utensils and things like that. And what I remember, it was actually from my memory, like, we were close knit with these neighbors. We had a sense of community. We were quite close. And although it was like scary, but at the same time, I don't know, I had good memories of it. Maybe because I was a child and my parents probably were the ones that were stressing and anxious.
It's interesting that you said there was that sense of community, because I often think, periods of darkness or suffering away can bring people together. So do you think that was the case because you were kind of all going through this experience together?
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I think from what I remember, there was a sense of community. And there was always laughter and, people playing cards and chess and joking. And, I just felt like that whole building, we were a family living underground, like a tight-knit family.
Well, very interesting. And then what happened after that? Because I know obviously you're living in Australia at the moment. From your accent, I imagine you've been living in Australia for a while.
Okay, so at 9 years, I have an uncle who already had a family in Australia. And so he brought us over. So we kind of, firstly, we escaped the war on boat to Cyprus. And then we got sent back because I think they were missing documents or something like that I can't remember exactly. And then we came back, I think maybe a few weeks later. And we lived in Cyprus for about 9 months. And those were good memories too. We lived in the chalet overlooking the beach with a pool. And then I think 9 months later, we then ended up coming to Australia. So I was about 9.5 years old. But I remember I didn't want to come to Australia because, like, my mum and dad, I think my mum has like 6 or 7 sisters. My dad has like 6 siblings. Most of them have children. So, like, my cousins were like my brothers and sisters. So we were always hanging out with my cousins every weekend, playing. Although we had some cousins here, but I just felt like I was very attached to Lebanon. And I remember, like, the first year or two, I did not want to be here. But now I feel very grateful because looking back, I think people can have passport privilege, and like having a Lebanese passport, it's very hard to travel anywhere. But having an Australian passport, like I was able to go to so many countries without even applying for a visa. And obviously healthcare, and we have a lot of comfort here compared to, like in Lebanon, if you don't have children and you're old, you're kind of screwed. Like there's no security.
So what I read a post of yours, which I'm going to read out now because I think it plays into a lot of what you're talking about here. So it says, for many years I played victim because of my sex, ethnicity, lack of money, single parent household, and other factors. But once I realized that the one thing that was oppressing and holding me back was my attitude, I began to do great things. So the reason I wanted to bring this up now is I think the way you're talking about these things, obviously like your childhood and Cyprus, you're actually saying, you had community, you had good experiences. I think some other people, maybe if they would look back at a similar childhood, maybe would play a little bit more of the victim, right? And even you're talking around how, when you first went to Australia, it was difficult, but now you're very grateful because you've got this passport, you've been able to do a lot with your life. So obviously, as you said in the post, like you used to play the victim. So how did you go about changing your mindset? Because I know there are a lot of people out there that still have this kind of mindset that maybe don't want to be a victim anymore, but are not sure how to change their attitude.
Okay, so I think, the way I grew up, my parents always told me like I can do anything that I want, even like I could be, like I was no different. They never made me feel like men have more privilege, or people from a different race, or like white people have privilege. I just always felt like I could do anything. But then I met these friends, and they started saying, oh, did you know, because you're a woman, you're oppressed, and because you're in the minority here, you're oppressed. And, like they just started playing with my mind. And then I started to feel like a victim because I just started to internalize everything they were saying. And I started to do more research, and I'm like, oh yes, because I'm a woman, maybe that I lost that sale because I'm a woman, or maybe I didn't get that talk because males from this race have more privilege. But then I think what happened is, obviously Tony Robbins, I love him. I started to do a lot of his work and a lot of his coaching. And he just taught you, like, at the end of the day, like everybody has some kind of circumstances, and everyone has privileges and non-privileges. It could be your height, your looks, your family, single parent, whatever it is. It's just you have to do the best you can with what you've been given. And once I started to just obviously focus on what I can control and my abilities, I started to do so much better, because I did start to suffer in my sales and my business once I did start to have that victim mindset, even in my dating life. So that's I think a long story, or that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, that was great. And obviously you talked a little bit about, like, in your profession as well, that, victim mindset can, harm you, especially in sales. And it's something I've seen training salespeople is like, oh yeah, the client is being rude to me, or, marketing isn't giving me leads, or whatever it is. So obviously you were able to do this yourself on a personal level. And as you said, this wasn't just related to sales, to dating, probably many other things in your life. When you see this in other people, and let's take this outside even the context of sales, how do you go about that? Do you think you can help people that have victim mindset, or do you think they need to come to that conclusion themselves?
I think it's important to make them aware sometimes, or to help them become aware of their blind spots, because everyone has blind spots, but sometimes they might be resistant. So you could say something and they become a bit defensive, but you've planted that seed in their mind. And once you plant that seed, maybe they have to come to that knowledge on their own. So you can't push people into a behavior or changing their beliefs. That's their own journey. But I think educating people, giving them that awareness. And I think you're right, like victim mindset doesn't just carry to do with your sex, your race, your socio-economic. it's also got to do with you at work and how you might take feedback, or perhaps if somebody's ghosting you in sales, definitely if someone's ghosting you or someone is rude to you or someone complains about you, yes, you can cry about it for like a little bit. That's normal human behavior. But at the same time, there are some people that never recover. So that all those experiences start to compound. They start to filter that information in a very distorted way. And they start to generalize everything about themselves and the world around them, rather than changing the filters in their minds and even creating their own realities.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I've seen that a lot. So to come to a stage a bit later in your life. So at 26, I know you were traveling, you ended up living in Mexico. You told me you're actually working and doing some sales jobs there as well, which I found interesting. So why did you land in Mexico? What kind of brought you there?
Okay, so I guess I had like this travel bug and I wanted to travel, and I was saving for a whole year in my job, and I did a TESOL course. So I did to teach English overseas, and I didn't know where to go. I thought maybe Asia or Europe. But then I remember I was so confused. So the time came for me to book my ticket and travel, and I walked over to the world globe and my finger landed on Mexico. And I had never considered Mexico, never on my radar. Like it was not even something that and everyone's like, oh, it's so dangerous, don't go. But yeah, I just kind of took the leap of faith and I booked my ticket, and 2 weeks later I was in Mexico without knowing anybody, like I had no connections or anything like that. But it was quite an adventure, because I remember waking up in the morning and just walking out. Actually, I was booked to go to Mexico City, and I had a hotel booked. And then what happened is I get out of the plane about 10, I don't remember exactly, in the night, 10 p.m. And I'm meant to get a taxi to go to my hotel. And something pulled me towards the map of Mexico at the airport. So I had my luggage. And then I see this like little kind of, it looks like a little island at the bottom of Mexico. And I see Cancun. And then I was like, oh, I've heard of Cancun. It looks quite interesting. It looks like there's an ocean around it. And I had a feeling like something told me, I don't know, like this strong feeling said, do not leave this airport. Do not step out. Do not go to your hotel. Go to the counter right now and book a ticket to Cancun. So I booked a ticket to Cancun that night. And 2 hours later, I was on a plane to Cancun. I think I get there at 12:30 a.m. or 1 a.m. I get a cab and I said, can you please take me to like a hotel? I didn't even know what hotel. Like at the time, I didn't have a smartphone. I just said, can you take me to one of the hotels in Cancun? And he took me to this hotel. And yeah, at 1 a.m., I went to Cancun. It was just so weird how I did not leave the airport. Like I'm just like, yeah. And I ended up living in Cancun, Playa del Carmen, around that area for 2 years.
So it sounds from this story and kind of some of the things you're talking about so far that you're quite like an intuitive person, like you trust your gut. And
more so before. No, I don't know about now, but
before.
When I was younger, yeah. I was just so go with the flow. Yeah, just so spontaneous and living in a way that was not so, I don't want to say safe, but I was like fearless.
Well, let's come on to something, because there's another point that you've put here, which I think is quite interesting, and I could relate to a lot. And I think it's quite related to this podcast, because a lot of the podcast is around like balance, and we talk a lot around balance between like the spiritual and material, things we can measure, things we can't measure. And then I also think like having security, but also like striving for improvement in your life as well. So, liberal, conservative, whatever you want to call this constant cosmic balance that we've got. So one of the quotes you've got here is, although I've always been a free spirit without a routine or plan, I have worked hard to change my values to value security, habits, and routine. So there's something I wanted to talk about with that free spiritedness that's more related to your career now. But just before we get into that, what I wanted to ask you is, how did you go about that change? Because as you said, you were kind of this fearless person in your 20s, like in Mexico, just making these decisions on the fly, to now, you know, you've got this successful business that you're running, and you're a respected sales trainer. So how did you go about making that change? How has your life changed so much in the years in between?
So, I mean, the thing is, I always had a job and I did really well in this job. And then I was on my way to progression where I could have been, you know, an executive in 2-3 years, because I was quite, I don't know, high achiever and quite, just working really hard. I've always been competitive and worked really hard, but then I'll sabotage it all because of my travel bug. So suddenly I feel like I need to travel. I need to go live somewhere else. And then, you know, I'll just pack my bags and I'll go traveling. But so there was like this inner fight between, I want to travel, I want that freedom, but also that security is important and making money is important. And even it got to the point where I started my business 10 years ago and I still had this travel bug. And again, I think 4 years later, after starting my business, I took off to Mexico for 9 months. So imagine you're growing your business. It's based in Australia, and then you go to another country. Like, I still had my clients, but I kind of put it on hold for 9 months. Again, I went to Mexico and traveled around Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and many places around Mexico, although I had lived there many years ago. And okay, so I did ayahuasca, and I've never said this on a podcast, but I did ayahuasca because I did a lot of research, and it said like this is a personal development tool. And I was into like the spiritual world. I was meditating, doing yoga, and actually my yoga teacher approached me and asked me if I want to do ayahuasca. And I can't even believe I'm telling you this, because like I'm so like business minded, you know, it's quite personal what I'm just sharing, but anyway, why not? And my yoga teacher said, do you want to, you know, this will help you, because I was a bit depressed at the time. And he said, oh, it's going to help you, don't worry. And then I remember in the ayahuasca, they said, what is your intention? So this is in 2017. And I still had my business and I was still doing a bit of online training and things like that. But I was just like, you know, my money's been spent on this travel. I need to focus on my business. And I remember in the ceremony, they said, what's your intention? I said, I'd love to be, in my mind, I want to be very focused on my business. I want to get rid of this travel bug. And I remember when I left, I don't know, maybe it's like unconscious, or maybe it's like, maybe I believed that it worked. I don't have no idea. I was so like, I came back to Australia in June 2017. I was so focused, working 12-hour days, you know, rebuilding the business, a pipeline. And I did really well. Like, I think like I got my first client like 2 weeks after I was here, or even before. I remember being on because then after the ceremony, I went traveling to Nicaragua, and I was on my phone, like closing deals, and I made like a deal for 10 grand, like for training for the day, already set for me when I was coming back to Australia. And yeah, and since then, I've been so focused on business and security, and even having a relationship, and, you know, starting a family, and everything is just, I think I've been a different person.
Interesting.
So that's yeah. And, you know, I actually forgot it was because of ayahuasca. Like, I thought maybe, because Tony Robbins as well, he says, if you have two conflicting values, like one of your values is security, but also your top value is freedom, they're going to be in war with each other. So it's important to identify which one do you want first. You know, if you want security, then you have to work on that. And maybe freedom is not going to be your top, or maybe freedom is going to help you. I'm talking about freedom, like just going traveling around the world, but maybe that security is going to give you that freedom.
I think
so also probably, Tony Robbins, I have to, you know.
Yeah, I think I'd probably disagree with Tony Robbins on this one, because it's one of the reasons I started the podcast. And I think actually one of the reasons I think you've lived quite a meaningful life and been successful in your career, but also done these amazing things, is you've had these two things together, right? You've gone traveling, you've gone to Latin America, but as you said, even in the times where you had that life, you still had jobs, right? You still did successfully in sales, you still got rid of this victim mindset like you were talking about earlier. And I think maybe at some points, like you said, when you did ayahuasca, you were a little bit too in like, oh, I'm just going to go traveling, I'm going to go around the world. So maybe you went too much in the freedom side of things. But I think in general, it's good to have these balance, because I think some people maybe live too secure a life, right? And I was thinking one of the reasons I related to your story is I grew up in London. And I think a lot of people in London, they like, I need to get to the next step in my career. I need to like wait 2 years to get the promotion. Then they get the next promotion. I need to wait another 2 years to get a promotion. And they say to me, oh, I wish I could like move to Colombia or Spain or like places I've lived. And I said, you can do it. You've got a load of money. You've been saving a load of money. But I think people put barriers in their head with security. But like you said, you can also go on the other end where you just travel around the world for years and you're a hippie, and you know, so it's for me really, I think in life, and one of the reasons I started this podcast is like, how can we have the balance between the two? So yeah, anyway, I went on a long rant there, but I'm not sure I agree with Tony Robbins is like, you've got to have one or the other, but it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, he just says if it's too contradictory, like say if it's two contradicting values, then you might be a bit confused. So he's not saying don't have that as, you can't choose, but he just says, if you want to make money, but you have another value that is stopping you, you have to understand like which one do you want to focus on. But that's interesting. So because you're also a bit of a traveler yourself, and you don't live in London at the moment, do you?
No, I do live in like, I moved back here. What year are we in? 2023. So I moved back here 2019. My traveling has always been slightly different in that I've like generally gone to, if I've gone on holiday, I've gone for 2 or 3 weeks, and I've lived in countries. So I've lived in 4 or 5 countries, working remotely. But yeah, ayahuasca is actually something that's come up a lot on the show. We've had like an ayahuasca shaman.
Wow,
We've had a couple of people talk about how they've taken ayahuasca. But what I find is like everyone's experience is different. It's also something that's quite difficult to explain, because anything kind of spiritual, you're in a almost parallel universe when you take it. It's quite difficult to explain. But obviously I know you said the outcome was, you know, you became a bit more like focused on your business and security. But what else happened in your ayahuasca journey? How else would you describe it?
I don't remember, like it was all vague. You just see all these like pictures and patterns, and you know, if you Google it, like whatever you see on Google, all that artwork, you see it there. But yeah, no, I just remember my goal and intention came true. That's what I remember about it.
One of the things that I wanted to talk about was, and again, this relates to like, because I like this topic you're talking around, because I think this is another cosmic balance of like freedom and security. What I found in sales is, so one of the things we teach salespeople, right? And I think this isn't just for salespeople, I think this is for anyone, is detaching from the outcome. The more you want something, the more you're attached to it, the more desperate you're going to be for it. And you're clinging on to that, and it may not happen, right? So we talk around work as hard as you can to drive towards a goal, but also don't be too attached to it, right? And one of the things that I found, because I've never seen myself as that materialistic person. When I was growing up, I wasn't like, I want to be a millionaire, I want to make loads of money. When I got into sales, I found it quite easy in that I wasn't that attached to the outcome. I wasn't thinking, hey, I need to get this sale. And I think it made me a little bit more relaxed. So I wanted to ask if it was the same for you, because you've got this like free spiritedness. Do you think it helped you with that, you know, concept of detaching from the outcome?
Yeah. So for me, it wasn't about because I've always, when I was younger, I used to have a bit of a communist mindset. So I like did not care about money, material things. It was just about experiences. And I was working in sales, but for me, I did well in sales was because I'm very competitive, and I need to like reach those goals, and I don't want to let anyone down. So for example, like the worst thing I could have done is like let my manager down. So I would be going above and beyond just for the team and the manager. And it's not even about like the incentive was the last thing I was thinking about from memory. And even now, like I think what drives me is like the pressure of the people around me, you know, and like creating a good life. But it's not for me, because I don't really care about having a fancy car or designer bags, or I've never had that. So I always need external pressure on me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even when I run the training, like I want to do really well because I don't want to let the people that hide me down and the people that are paying me down, or, you know, the people attending down.
So would you say your cosmic bridge, so the cosmic bridge is something that's like balancing the material and the spiritual life. So obviously your profession sales is giving you material goods, but really you're inspired by serving and serving others and serving people's spirit. And as you said, it could be your family, it could be the people you're training. Would you say that's one of your cosmic bridges of like serving others?
Yeah, definitely. I think I've never thought about it like that. But yeah, probably serving, or like not letting people down. That's about it. And obviously I think I have a sense of achievement, or maybe I'm a bit competitive and I want to do well as well. So it's a little bit of ego as well, I'm guessing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, interesting question you're bringing up here about ego. So I'm quite into like psychology, and Carl Jung is someone I read a lot about, and he talks around like the ego and the self. And, you know, in general, especially in sales, right, ego can be a bad thing because it's, again, going to the victimhood mindset. Oh, it's not me, right? I'm great. It's the customer's fault. It's my manager's fault. It's marketing's fault. They're not giving me leads.
Yeah.
But the ego can be a good thing. Like you were talking about being competitive, wanting to hit your target, wanting to beat others. So the ego can be bad. It can be good. How can you balance your ego in a way, I guess, both in sales and outside of it, so your ego is, I guess, being a positive force in your life versus a negative force?
Yeah, so I think you have to also recognize how big your ego is or how sensitive you are. Because even when it comes to narcissism, it's not just those people that are like showing off and so loud. There's actual narcissism where you're very sensitive and overly sensitive and take things personally, and you have that victim mentality. I'm not saying like everyone has a bit of narcissism in them, but you have to be aware, like, how much do I have inside me? Like, how sensitive am I? Because an ego can make you become defensive, lash out, cry for days, and, you know, get depressed. Like, the ego makes you depressed. The ego, because it's all about you. So you have to think about doing things for others, or just like serving others. Even like in my business, like, for example, many times I want to close a sale because I've got 2 people that work for me. And if I don't close the sale, they're not going to, you know, I want to pay them and keep them in their jobs. Or there's a lady, she works for me. She's a business development consultant. I get excited when I close a deal because she's going to get 20% commission. You know, so I'm like, yes, she's getting that commission. So I guess for me, the outcome is also them. And also the impact that I'm making on the people that I'm training, because sometimes there's people that I'm training that have never had sales training. They're shaking before they get on the phone. And after the training, they feel so much more confident. So yeah, you have to, I guess you have to be aware of your ego, but at the same time. And I think ego is also good. Like, I'm not saying too much, but you need a bit of ego, because then you become a martyr and everyone just walks all over you.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
You won't have that confidence, or you won't be able to sell yourself.
Yeah.
Or sell why people need to give you their time.
Yeah. I really like what you said. I had never thought about that before, that narcissism can also be in the sense of like, because often we think around narcissism of like, oh, I'm the best in the world, I'm the world's greatest, I'm the savior.
Yeah.
But you also talked about the sensitive type of narcissism.
Covert narcissism. I think that's what it's called.
Yeah. What's it called? Covert narcissism.
Yeah. I mean, don't quote me on this, but I was studying about narcissism because I'm also interested in psychology, and I was reading about it a few years ago. And I think it was called covert narcissism. So there's different types of narcissists, but the coverts are the ones that are very sensitive and overly sensitive and have the victim mindset. And they just hold on to grudges because their ego is so fragile. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that they could still show you that they're humble, they're quiet, they're, you know, introverted people. So you're probably now going to start observing people around you going, I wonder who's...
No, I think, as you said, a lot of it is self-awareness. One of the psychological concepts I love a lot is The Shadow by Carl Jung, because it kind of makes you look at yourself and your own shadow and things you're doing wrong. So when I look at these concepts, let's say covert narcissism, as well as analyzing others, it's also good to analyze yourself and be like, when am I being a covert narcissist? And even though I'm aware of the victim mindset, I still need to think on a daily basis, when am I playing a victim? Because even if you're aware of it, we still all do these things, right? We still all be the victim sometimes. Even if you're aware of it, there's still going to be days, there's bad things happening in your life, and you become a victim, right? Oh.
No, I definitely have a bit of narcissism because, especially when it's being overly sensitive or not taking a constructive feedback in a good way, or if my spouse says something and I, kind of get really defensive, or but have you read the book The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so it's a really good book, and he says that every single person has narcissism in them, but there's different levels. Even the martyr that gives to charity has a sense of narcissism, to feel good about, it's still always back to the ego. So I think, there are some people, obviously, they're 100% narcissists, and some people, they might be 5% narcissists, and some people 50%,
Yeah, for sure.
And like now this word has been so overused, like every time someone's complaining about, because I'm in these Facebook groups, for people with problems or dating, and, anytime like someone posts about a dating story, that person that broke their heart is always a narcissist. Like, and I'm just like, okay, is every person that rejects you a narcissist? I don't know. Because statistically, I think don't quote me on this, but 0.6% of the population is a narcissist.
Interesting. Because I know there's that stat, which is around that percentage as well, of people are psychopaths. So it's like narcissism and psychopathy.
Yeah.
Are those two things related?
I'm not sure, but I think sociopath and psychopath are related, where a sociopath has no conscience and they might commit petty crimes where they're stealing, or they might, cheat on you without remorse or betray you or whatever. Like, but the psychopath is the one that's able to also murder and kill.
Okay.
But they both have because they've done tests on them, and there's a part of the brain where it lights up where we have a conscience, where we feel guilty. Yeah. But these people don't feel guilty. But I'm not sure about a narcissist. Would they also, I've never looked into that. Would they have also sociopathic tendency where they don't have that guilt chemical? I have no idea.
When anyone listening, maybe you can research that. You can message Rana.
I mean, message you. I know I'll be researching this after, because like that's just a question now I have in my brain. So I now have to. I know after we get off this call, I'll be Googling that.
Nice. One of the other things I know you're interested in is NLP, which for anyone who doesn't know, well, it's neuro-linguistic programming. Again, we actually had an NLP coach on the show. I did a couple of sessions with him. I had no idea what NLP is. Apparently, it's a big thing. But yeah, could you tell us a little bit more about like what NLP is, and two, like how it's helped you?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always been interested in NLP since I worked in sales in Mexico. I always just heard about it, and a lot of salespeople use these tools just for their own confidence. I was living in London, and I got an email, like a marketing email every week from this company, like NLP course. It's a 10-day course. I think it was like $2,000 or something. And I had just finished my job. My visa had run out, but I was still living in London for a few months because I didn't want to leave London. So I did this NLP course, and I found it so amazing. But what we learned in NLP is, so Richard Bandler and John Grinder, they are in the 70s, there were two students. One was a statistics student, another one was a psychology student. And for 3 years, they studied the best psychotherapists of their time. So Fritz Perl, Virginia Satir, and Erickson Milton, who's a hypnotherapist. I think that's how you say his name. And after 3 years, they asked them, like, what is it that you're doing? They packaged their best tools. So best psychotherapy, psychology tools, because they were getting very fast results. And they created many tools called NLP off the back of these psychotherapists. And it's a personal development tool. So it's about how you communicate with your mind, with yourself and other people, how you use your physiology to feel good, and also how you represent information that's through your experiences. And it's also about how you filter information. So a lot of times we distort information. So I could be having an argument with someone and I go tell somebody else that this person was so aggressive. But if you were a fly on the wall, you might say, no, the person you were talking to was not aggressive. They were quite calm. But in my mind, I started distorting the situation. We delete information, so we might focus on all the negative things that are happening, and we delete all the positive things, and we generalize. So we say, like, I always do this, or all men are like this, or I'm not good at this. So it's about those three filters: generalizations, deletions, and distortions, changing those filters. When you're having an experience, is being aware of those filters, understanding, am I distorting this situation at the moment? And how can I change that reality? How can I change those stories in my brain that are limiting me from achieving my goals? So that's the basis of NLP. And obviously there's a lot of tools that you can use in order to change the memories and reprogram your mind. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And it's kind of reminded me of some of the sessions I did. So let's imagine there's an event that happened to you, and it's an event that you play over and over in your mind. It makes you anxious, makes you nervous, whatever it is. How can you go about looking at that differently and looking at, like you said, I like the analogy of a fly on the wall, looking at it a bit more neutrally and less emotionally. How do you go about that?
Yeah, so I think there's one which is called the swish pattern, where they the NLP practitioner will take you through a script and they'll tell you to go back to that memory, and then they'll tell you to make it more darker or more small, put a funny voice on it, detach yourself. So you're actually the looking down, and you play funny music and you play it forward and backward for maybe 10 minutes. And maybe that memory was traumatic because in your memory, how you keep replaying it is very colorful, it's bright, it's loud, it's aggressive. But then in NLP, what we do is we try and get you to change that memory and make it so small and insignificant, even funny, that when you try to remember it again, you're not remembering it the way that you were, which was causing you all that stress and anxiety.
So it's almost more like the emotion that you felt during that, and you're almost like hanging on to that emotion and that feeling that you had like later on in life as well.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's because of the memories and how we remember that information, how we generalize that information, how we distorted that information, and how we deleted certain things from that experience. And it's just tapping into that memory and changing it. There's another one where you can go back in a specific time and you can tap into a time where you felt really confident or really happy, and you go into like, okay, go back to a time where you felt super confident. Be very specific. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you smell. Tell me what you hear. How does it feel? Be in that moment of feeling super confident. And you just kind of play that with your senses for like 20 minutes. Maybe you do that every day. It's like a meditation. And then you tap into that confidence. And usually like you anchor a spot on your palm where every time you might tap that palm, you anchor. It's like Pavlov's dogs, where he was ringing the bell and they started salivating. So
very interesting. Yeah, we'll put a link to the podcast we did with Guillermo in the notes, who's an NLP coach as well.
Okay.
Rana,
so just to clarify, I'm not an NLP. I am an NLP practitioner, but I don't coach people. I just use it in my training.
Yeah.
So I don't sit down with people and like I did a little bit for practice, but I kind of, and I was planning to do that, but then I just started training. I kind of evolved into sales training.
Yeah, and you know what I found, which is the reason I'm interested in talking about this stuff, and the reason I actually think that you've done very well in sales, is because you've got an interest in all these other things like psychology and meditation, and you've gone around the world, which I think seeing the way other people live sometimes gives you different ideas. And that's often the advice I give to salespeople is, yeah, you need to study sales a bit and understand it. But really how you're going to get elite by sales is studying other fields and then applying them to sales, right? Psychology is a great thing. So I think this is a good example as well.
No, absolutely. I think you have to know psychology, because a lot of sales methods do come from psychology.
Yeah.
Even like the discovery, in therapy session.
For sure.
They do a discovery with you. They ask you, they don't give you suggestions. They ask you questions, right? So
yeah, 100%. Wanted to ask you one last question. We ask this quite a lot on the show. So let's take a step back to maybe, I don't know how old you were when you had this, when you're like 18, have a bit more of that like victim mindset. What advice would you give to your younger self at that stage?
Oh, wow. That's pretty, obviously, yeah, definitely. I would say to myself that, to be honest, that would be hard because I don't know if myself would even listen. But the advice, whatever I said to you now on this podcast, like obviously I would say being a victim is not going to serve you. Look at the people that are successful around you. They have a different story. So I'll teach them all about the stories and filtering and, changing their perception. But I can imagine saying to my 18-year-old self, don't be a victim, whatever. My 18-year-old self would like, piss off. Like, I don't want to listen to you. So,
as you said, it may go in the subconscious, right? Even if they don't accept it straight away, the device is going to set
my 18-year-old self was very rebellious, stubborn, did not take advice from anyone. Like pretty, yeah.
Well, I think most 18-year-olds are like that.
I would say just go to a personal development workshop.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now you're doing a lot of things in your career. Is there anywhere, we'll put a link to your LinkedIn and social media and website, any other resources that you'd like to send people to in the show notes?
I have a TEDx talk if they want to see it. It's called How to Achieve Anything in Your Life by Learning How to Sell. But you can just Google my name, TEDx, and you can watch that.
Cool. Well, yeah, thanks a lot for coming on the show. I've really enjoyed the chat.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. I enjoyed the chat too. Very deep, nice conversation. Probably one of the deepest podcasts I've ever been on. And I think I've been on like 25 different podcasts.
Awesome. I appreciate that. So really like the episode with Rana today. Share a lot in common with her, our journeys traveling through Latin America and also doing sales training and that kind of spiritual and material side that we both have. I think the takeaway I really liked that she mentioned was looking at past events differently, because often experiences we have from the past, the word trauma gets thrown around a lot. So even if it's not a really traumatic experience, but a negative experience from your past that affected you, it may not be so negative if you look at it from a different light, right? Talk about it in a different aspect with someone you love or a therapist or an NLP coach, or even just doing meditation on that experience. And don't imagine yourself in your body in that situation, but as a fly on the wall. And you may suddenly look at it from a different aspect, because often we're not looking at things with clarity, looking at things as a fly on the wall, and we may start to see that situation differently. If you enjoyed this episode, please send it to friends and family. Please subscribe to us across all your favorite podcast platforms and YouTube, and we'll see you on the next episode. Cheers.